Okay, so after looking at Milgram's study, there's a task in your booklet to define the term obedience to authority and to answer the question, what are the differences between conformity and obedience? So if you want to pause it, I'm just going to put the answers on. So obedience is a type of social influence whereby someone acts in response to a direct order from a figure of authority or higher perceived status. There's the implication that the person receiving the order is made to respond in a way that they would not otherwise have done without the order. And the differences between conformity and obedience. Obedience is a more direct form of social influence where there's a specific demand to act in a specific way. For conformity, everyone needs to be equal status. For obedience, there must be someone of different or perceived different status. People generally acknowledge their own obedience, but they're more reluctant to acknowledge conformity. So now we're looking at the situational variables that affect conformity. So there are certain things about a situation that affect how obedient a person is. And you need to know about the three factors by name because they're named in the spec. So proximity, location, and uniform. And you can be asked about these all together or separately in the exam. So before we look into the variables on page 28 of your booklet, if you read through the Milgram variations and then estimate what you think will happen to the obedience rate in each replication. And then if you pause this before I go on, because it has the answers on it. So once you've estimated, in the proximity variation, where the victim is placed in the same room as a participant, obedience dropped to 40%. So we're comparing all of these to Milgram's original obedience level of 65%. So there's a drop to 40%. So that is a case of kind of reduced proximity. So the closer you are, the less obedient you'll be. With touch proximity, so the participant had to hold the victim's hand down, obedience dropped to 30%. With remote authority, when the experimenter left the room, obedience dropped further to 20%. So you're saying as proximity from the experimenter increases, obedience will decrease. In terms of the venue, when the experiment was moved from Yale to some rundown offices, obedience dropped to 47.5%. The argument is that Yale is quite a prestigious environment and people took the experiment more seriously. And legitimacy of the experimenter. So an experimenter, Mr. Williams, not in a lab coat, obedience dropped to 20%. So there is lots of research on the power of uniforms. There's a good clip from The Real Hustle about how much people get away with if they're in a uniform and how much people will obey. So it's worth a look at. So in your booklet on page 29 to 30, you need to complete the task identifying the importance of proximity, location, and uniform in obedience. This is an example of a 6-mark exam question. So a senior army instructor is advising new instructors how to ensure discipline in training classes. He says, always wear your instructor jacket and stand up close when giving instructions. Make them all understand whose responsibility for the exercise. Serious problems should always be dealt with in the instructor's office. So referring to research into obedience, explain 3 reasons why the instructor's advice should be effective. So when they talk about research into obedience, you can always use Milgram. You don't need to use any other studies. And your 3 variables are uniform, proximity, and legitimacy of authority. So instructor jacket is the uniform, stand close when giving instructions is a proximity, and the location is the instructor's office. And you just need to use the information that you already have to complete your booklets, page 31 to 32.